Chapter 3. The kings have chosen. Do you believe Brahaspati? Asked Shiva. Night had fallen on the Panchavati guest colony just outside the main city. Injured and fatigued, Shiva's entourage had retired to their quarters for a well-deserved rest. Sati and Shiva were in their chambers, having just returned from the city. They had not spoken to a soul about what they'd learned at the Panchavati school. They had not even told the Suryavanshis that Brahaspati, their beloved chief scientist, was still alive. They were to meet him again the next day. Well, I don't think Brahaspatiji is lying, said Sati. I do remember that more than 2 decades ago, Lord Brigu had spent many months in Devagiri, which was highly unusual for the Rajguru. He is a rare sight in Meluha, since he usually chooses to spend his time meditating in his Himalayan cave. Aren't Rajgurus supposed to stay in the royal palace and guide the king? Not someone like Lord Brigu. He helped my father get elected as emperor because he believed my father would be good for Meluha. Beyond that, Lord Brigu has had no interest in the day-to-day governance of Meluha. He is a simple man, rarely seen in the so-called powerful circles. So he spent a lot of time in Devagiri. That may have been unusual, but what about the other things that Brahaspati said? Well, Lord Brigu, my father and Brahaspatiji were indeed away for many months. It had been announced as an important trade trip, but I can't imagine Lord Brigu or Brahaspatiji being interested in trade. Perhaps they were in Pariah at the time. And yes, the talented and lovely Taraji, who worked at Mount Mandar and had been sent to Pariah for a project, did disappear suddenly. It was announced that she had taken sannyas. Renouncing public life is very common in Meluha. But what Brahaspatiji revealed today was something else altogether. So you believe Brahaspati speaks the truth? All I'm saying is that Brahaspatiji may believe this to be the truth. But is it actually so, or is he mistaken? This decision of yours can change the course of history. What you do now will have repercussions for generations to come. It is a momentous occasion, a big battle. You have to be completely sure. I must speak with the Vasudevs. Yes, you must. But that is not all you wanted to say to me, is it? I think there is another aspect to be considered. What made Brahaspatiji disappear for over 5 years? What was he doing in Panchavati all this while? I feel this is an important question, perhaps linked to the backup manufacturing facility for the Samras that father had told me about. Yes, I didn't give it much importance then. But if the Samras is evil, that facility is the key. Actually, the Saraswati is the key. A manufacturing facility can always be rebuilt. But wherever it is built, it will always need the Saraswati waters. Kali told me at Icha War that her people attacked Meluhan temples and Brahmins only if they were directly harming the Nagas. Maybe those temples were production centers that used the powder from Mount Mandar to manufacture the Samras drink for the locals. She also said that a final solution would emerge from the Saraswati. That the Nagas were working on it. I don't know what that cryptic statement meant. We need to find out. You did not tell me about your conversation with Kali. Shiva, this is the first honest conversation we are having about Kali and Ganesh since you met my son at Kashi. Shiva became quiet. I'm not blaming you, continued Sati. I understood your anger. You thought that Ganesh had killed Brahaspatiji. Now that the truth has emerged, you are willing to listen. Shiva smiled and embraced Sati. Are you sure? Asked Shiva. It was late the next morning, 4 hours into the second prayer. Shiva sat with Sati at his side in his private chambers. Parvateshwar and Bhagat stood in front, holding a plank. The Meluhan general and the Indian prince had just returned after surveying the destroyed battleships. "Yes, my lord. The evidence is indisputable," said Bhagat. "Show me." Bhagat stepped forward. "The rivets on these planks are clearly Meluhan, lord." Parvateshwar had identified them. Parvateshwar nodded in agreement. "And the casing," continued Bhagat, "that improves the waterproofing is clearly Indian. Are you suggesting that Emperor Daksha and Emperor Dilipa have formed an alliance against us?" Shiva asked softly. "They've used the best technologies available in both our lands. These ships had navigated through a lot of seawater, judging by the mollusks on them. They needed the best to be able to make the journey quickly." Shiva breathed deeply, lost in thought. "My lord," said Bhagat, "for all his faults, I cannot imagine my father would be capable of leading a conspiracy such as this. He simply does not have the capability. He is just a follower in this plot. You have to target him, of course. But don't make the mistake of thinking that he is the main conspirator. He is not." Sati leaned towards Shiva. "Do you think my father can do this?" Shiva shook his head. "No. Emperor Daksha too is incapable of leading this conspiracy." Parvateshwar, still shamefaced at the dishonor brought upon his empire, said quietly, "The Meluhan code enjoins upon us to follow the rules, my lord. Our rules bid us to carry out our king's orders. In the hands of a lesser king, this can lead to a lot of wrong." "Emperor Daksha may have issued the orders, Parvateshwar," said Shiva. "But he didn't dream them up. There is a master who has brought the royalty of Meluhan and Swadweep together. Someone who also managed to procure the feared Devyastras. Heaven alone knows if he has any more divine weapons. It was a brilliant plan. By Lord Ram's grace, we were saved by the skin of our teeth. It cannot be Emperor Daksha or Emperor Dilipa. This is someone of far greater importance, intelligence and resource. And, one who is clever enough to conceal his identity." "Return to Meluha?" asked Virabhadra. Virabhadra and Kritika were in Shiva's private chambers. Kali and Sati were also present. "Yes, Bhadra," said Shiva. "It was the Meluhans and the Indians who attacked us together." "Are you sure Meluha is involved?" asked Virabhadra. "Parvateshwar has himself confirmed it." "And now you are worried about our people?" "Yes," said Shiva. "I'm worried the Gunas will be arrested and held hostage as leverage over us. Before they do so, I want you to slip into Meluha quietly and take our people to Kashi. I will meet you there. My scouts will guide Kritika and you through a secret route," said Kali. "Using our fastest horses and speediest boats, my people can get you close to Mka in 2 weeks. After that, you are on your own." "Meluha is a safe country to travel in," said Kritika. "We can hire fast horses up to the mouth of the Saraswati. After that we can travel on boats plying on the river. It's an easy route. With luck, we will reach Devagiri in another 2 weeks. The Gunas are in a small village not far from there." "Perfect," said Shiva. "Time is of the essence. Go now." "Yes Shiva," said Virabhadra as he turned to leave with his wife. "And Bajra," said Shiva. Virabhadra and Kritika turned around. "Do try to be brave," said Shiva. "If the Gunas have been arrested already, leave Meluha quickly and wait for me at Kashi." Virabhadra's mother was with the Gunas. Shiva knew Virabhadra would not abandon her to her fate so easily. "Shiva," whispered Virabhadra. Shiva got up and held Virabhadra's shoulder. "Bhadra, promise me." Virabhadra remained quiet. "If you try to release them by yourself, you will be killed. You will be of no use to your mother if you are dead, Bhadra." Virabhadra stayed silent. "I promise you, nothing will happen to the Gunas. If you cannot get them out, I will. But do not do anything rash. Promise me." Virabhadra placed his hand on Shiva's shoulder. There is something you aren't telling me. What have you discovered here? Why are you so afraid suddenly? Is there going to be a war? Is Meluha going to become our enemy? I'm not sure, Bhadra. I haven't made up my mind as yet. Then tell me what you do know. It was Shiva's turn to remain silent now. I'm going back to Meluha, Shiva. Had you asked me a month back, I would have said this would be the safest journey possible. A lot has changed since then. You have to tell me the truth. I deserve that. Shiva sat them down and revealed everything he had discovered during the course of the last few days. And you killed the rhino all by yourself? Asked an impressed Anandmi, her face suffused with a broad smile. Yes, Your Highness, said Kartik, stoic and expressionless as usual. Anandmi, Yarvati and Kartik were settled comfortably on soft cushions in the dining room. Kshatriya in word and deed, Anandmi and Kartik partook of the delicious rhinoceros meat. The Brahmin Yarvati restricted herself to roti, dal and vegetables. Have you decided to stop smiling altogether? Asked Anandmi. Or is this just temporary? Kartik looked up at Anandmi, a hint of a smile on his face. Smiling takes more effort than it's worth, Your Highness. Yarvati shook her head. You are just a child, Kartik. Don't trouble yourself so much. You need to enjoy your childhood. Kartik turned to the Meluhan chief physician. My brother Ganesh is a great man. Yarvatiji. He has so much to contribute to society, to the country. And yet, he was almost eaten alive by dumb beasts because he was trying to save me. Yarvati reached across and patted Kartik. I will never be so helpless again, swore Kartik. I will not be the cause of my family's misery. The door swung open. Parvateshwar and Bhagarat walked in. Just by looking at them, Anandmi could tell that they had discovered what she feared. Was it Meluha? Yarvati winced. She could not imagine her great country's name being dragged into a vile conspiracy like the attack on the Nilkanth's convoy at the outskirts of Panchavati. And yet, after what she had discovered of Emperor Daksha's perfidy during Sati's pregnancy at Mka, she would not be surprised if Meluhan ships had carried out this dastardly act. It's worse, sighed Bhagarat as he sat down. Parvateshwar sat next to Anandmi and held her hand. He looked at Yarvati, his pained expression bearing witness to his stark misery. The general prized his country, his Meluha, as Lord Ram's ultimate legacy. It was the custodian of Ramrajya. How could this great country's emperor have committed a dastardly act such as this? Even worse? Prompted Anandmi. Yes. It seems Swadweep is in on the conspiracy as well. Anandmi was stunned. What? It's either only Ayodhya or all of Swadweep. I cannot be sure if other kingdoms of Swadweep are following Ayodhya's lead. But Ayodhya is certainly involved. Anandmi looked at Parvateshwar. He nodded, confirming Bhagarat's words. Lord Ayudhya, be merciful, said Anandmi. What is wrong with father? I for one am not surprised, said Bhagarat, barely able to conceal his contempt. He is weak and gets easily exploited. It doesn't take much for him to succumb. For once Anandmi didn't rebuke her brother for denigrating their father. She looked at Parvateshwar. He seemed lost and unsure. Change was horrible for the Suryavanshis. For the people of the masculine, used as they were to unchanging rules and stark predictability. Anandmi turned her husband's face towards herself and kissed him. Gently, reassuringly. She smiled warmly. He half smiled back. Kartik quietly put his plate down, washed his hands and walked out of the room. It was early afternoon as Kartik and Ganesh's steps led them around the 5 banyan trees from whose existence Panchavati derived its name. Non-Nagas were not allowed inside the inner city. In truth, many of them, Brangas included, refused to enter due to a strong superstition about the misfortune that would befall those that did. But the Neelkant's family did not believe in it. And anyway, nobody wanted to enforce an entry ban on them. Why have only Lord Ram's idols been depicted on these trees, Dada? Kartik asked his elder brother. You mean why have his wife, Lady Sita, and his brother, Lord Lakshman, not been shown? Not just them, even his great devotee, Lord Hanuman, is missing. Ganesh and Kartik were admiring the beautiful idols of Lord Ram sculpted into the main trunk of each of the 5 banyans. The 5 tree idols showed the ancient king, respected as the 7th Vishnu, in the 5 different roles of his life known to all, a son, a husband, a brother, a father and a godly king. Each banyan trunk depicted him in a different form. In each form, in a manner that somehow appeared natural, the sculptors had made the idols look towards the temple of Lord Ryuja and Lady Mohini at one corner of the square. Their idols, on the other hand, were placed in the front section of the temple as opposed to the back as in most temples, with the effect that the 2 deities appeared to be looking at all 5 tree idols as well. It seemed as if the architects intended to show the great Mahadeva and the noble 7th Vishnu being respectful to each other. It's in keeping with Bhumaidvi's instructions, answered Ganesh. I know his traditional depiction in the Sapt sign who is always along with his 3 favorite people in the world. Lady Sita, Lord Lakshman, and Lord Hanuman. But it was an order of Bhumaidvi, our founding goddess, that Lord Ram always be shown alone in Panchavati. Especially at the 5 banyans. Why? I don't know. Perhaps she wanted us to always remember that great leaders, like the Vaishnavas and the Mahadevas, may have millions following them. But at the end of the day, they carry the burden of their mission alone. Like Baba? Asked Kartik, referring to their father. Yes, like Baba. He is the one who stands between evil and India. If he fails, life in the subcontinent will be destroyed by evil. Baba will not fail. Ganesh smiled at Kartik's response. Do you know why? Asked Kartik. Ganesh shook his head. No. Why? Kartik clasped Ganesh's right hand and held it to his chest, like the brother warriors of yore. Because he is not alone. Ganesh smiled and embraced Kartik. They walked silently around the banyan trees, doing the holy parikrama of Lord Ram's idols. What is going on, Dada? Asked Kartik, as they continued their circumambulation. Ganesh frowned. Why have both the emperors allied against Baba? Ganesh breathed deeply. He never lied to Kartik. He considered his brother an adult, and treated him as such. Because Baba threatens them, Kartik. They are the elite. They are addicted to the benefits they derive from evil. Baba's mission is to fight for the oppressed, to be the voice of the voiceless. It is obvious that the elite will want to stop him. What is the evil that Baba is fighting? How has it entrenched its claws so deeply? Ganesh took Kartik by the hand and made him sit at the foot of one of the banyans. This is for you alone, Kartik. You are not to tell anyone else. For it is Baba's right to decide when and how others are to be informed. Kartik nodded in response. Ganesh sat next to Kartik and explained to him about what Brahaspati and Shiva had discussed the previous day. What have you been doing these past 5 years, Brahaspati? Asked Shiva. Sati and Shiva had joined the chief scientist in the Naga Queen's chambers. Brahaspati felt like he was being interrogated. But he could understand Shiva's need to get to the bottom of the issue. I was trying to find a permanent solution to the Samras problem, answered Brahaspati. Permanent solution? Destroying Mount Mandar is a temporary solution. We know it will get rebuilt. The Nagas tell me the reconstruction has been surprisingly slow. It shouldn't have taken 5 years. not with Meluhan efficiency. But it's only a matter of time before it gets rebuilt. Shiva looked at Sati, but she didn't say anything. Once Mandar is back to full manufacturing capacity, the destruction of the Saraswati and the production of the toxic waste will begin in large measure once again. So we have to find a permanent solution. The best way to do that is to examine the samras ingredients. If we can somehow control that, we could possibly control the poisonous impact of the samras waste. Many ingredients can be easily replaced, but two of them cannot. The first are the bark and branches of the Sanjeevani tree, and the second is the Saraswati water. We cannot control the availability of the Sanjeevani tree. Meluha has large plantations of it across its northern reaches. How many plantations can one destroy? Besides, trees can always be replanted. That brings us to the Saraswati. Can we somehow control its waters? Shiva remembered parts of a conversation with Dakshal when he had first arrived in Devagiri. I was told by Emperor Dakshal that the Chandravanshas did try to destroy the Saraswati more than 100 years ago, by taking one of its main tributaries, the Yamuna, away from it and redirecting its flow towards the Ganga. It didn't really make much sense to me, but the Meluhans seemed to believe it. Brahaspati sniggered. The Chandravanshi ruling class cannot even build roads in their own empire. How can anyone think that they would have the ability to change the course of a river? What happened 100 years ago was an earthquake that changed the course of the Yamuna. The Meluhans subsequently defeated the Chandravanshas, and the resultant treaty mandated that the early course of the Yamuna would become no man's land. And Meluhans do have the technology to change the course of rivers. They built giant embankments to block and change the course of the Yamuna to make it flow back into the Saraswati. So what was your plan? Destroy the Yamuna embankments? No. I had considered it, but that is impossible as well. They have many fail-safe options. It would take 5 brigades and months of open work to be able to destroy those embankments. We would obviously have had to work in secret with a small number of people. So what was your plan? An alternative. We cannot take the Saraswati away. But could we make the Saraswati much less potent in the production of the samras? Is it possible to add something to the Yamuna waters, at its source, which would then flow into the Saraswati and control the amount of waste being produced? I thought that we had found one such ingredient. What? A bacterium which reacts with the Sanjeevani tree and makes it decay almost instantly. I thought the Sanjeevani tree was already unstable and decayed rapidly. Yarvati had told me the Naga medicine is created by mixing the crushed branches of another tree with the Sanjeevani bark to stabilize it. If the Sanjeevani is already unstable, why would it need bacteria to aid the decay? Wouldn't it just decay anyway? The Sanjeevani bark becomes unstable once stripped off the branch. The entire branch, if used, is not. The bark is easier for small-scale manufacture, but for manufacturing the samras in large quantities, we have to use crushed branches. This is what we did at Mount Mandar. But it is a method known only to my scientists. So what you want to do is make the Sanjeevani branch also unstable. Yes. And I discovered that it was possible to do so with this bacterium. But it is only available in Mesopotamia. Is this what you picked up from Kritkapa when you accompanied me on my initial travels through Meluha? You had said you were expecting a shipment from Mesopotamia. Yes, said Brahaspati. And it would have worked perfectly. The samras cannot be made without both the Sanjeevani tree and the Saraswati water. The presence of bacteria in the Saraswati water would render useless the Sanjeevani tree at the beginning of the process itself. And in any case, without the Saraswati water, the Samras cannot be made. Without the power of the Sanjeevani, the Samras would not be as potent. It will not triple or quadruple one's lifespan, but only increase it by 20 or 30 years. However, it would also mean that there would be practically no production of Samras waste. By sacrificing some of the powers of the Samras, we would take away all the poison of the Samras waste. Furthermore, these bacteria also mix with water and then multiply prodigiously. All we needed to do was release it in the Yamuna and the rest would follow. Sounds perfect? Why didn't you? There is no free lunch, said Brahaspati. The bacteria came with its own problems. It is a mild toxin in itself. If we mix it in large quantities, as would be required in the Saraswati, we could create a new set of diseases for all living beings dependent not just on the Saraswati but also the Yamuna. We would have only replaced one problem with another. So you were trying to see if the poisonous effects of the bacteria could be reduced or removed, without disturbing its ability to destroy the Sanjeevani tree? Yes. Secrecy was required. If those who support the Samras knew about these bacteria, they would try to kill it at its source. Had they known I was working on an experiment such as this, they would have had me assassinated. Aren't you afraid of being killed now? Asked Shiva. A lot of Meluhans will be angry with you when they discover you weren't the victim, but the perpetrator of the attack on Mount Mandar. Brahaspati breathed deeply. Earlier, it was important for me to remain alive since I alone could have done this research. But I have failed. And the solution to the Samras problem is not in my hands anymore. It's in your hands. It doesn't matter if I live any longer. Mount Mandar will be reconstructed. It's a matter of time. And Samras production will begin once again. You have to stop it, Shiva. For the sake of India, you have to stop the Samras. The reconstruction is a charade, Brahaspatiji, said Sati. It's to mislead enemies into thinking that it will take time to get Samras production back on track. To make them think that Meluha must be surviving on lower quantities of Samras. What? Is there another facility? Asked Brahaspati, as he looked quickly at Kali. But that cannot be true. It is, answered Sati. I was told by father himself. Apparently, it was built years ago. As a backup to Mount Mandar, just in case. Where? Asked Kali. I don't know, replied Sati. Damn! Exclaimed Kali, scowling darkly as she turned to Brahaspati. You had said that. That was not possible. The churners needed materials from Egypt. They could not be built from Indian material. We have allies constantly watching those Egyptian mines. No material has gone to Meluha. Brahaspati's face turned white as the implications dawned on him. He held his head and muttered, Lord Ram, be merciful. How can they resort to this? Resort to what? Asked Shiva. There's another way in which the Saraswati waters can be mixed with the crushed Sanjeevani branches. But it's considered wasteful and repugnant. Why? Firstly, it uses much larger quantities of the Saraswati water. Secondly, it needs animal or human skin cells. Excuse me, cried Shiva and Sati. It doesn't mean that one skins a live animal or human, said Brahaspati, as though reassuring them. What is needed is old and dead skin cells that we shed every minute. That we are alive. The cells help the Saraswati waters to grate the Sanjeevani branches. At molecular levels, the waters mixed with dead skin cells are simply poured over crushed branches placed in a chamber. This process does not require any churning. But as you can imagine, it wastes a lot of water. Secondly, how would one find animals and humans who would come to a faraway facility and get into a pool of water above a chamber which contains crushed Sanjeevani branches? It is risky. Why? Dead skin cells of humans or animals are best shed while bathing. A human sheds between 2 to 3 kilograms every year. Bathing hastens the process. But why is this risky? Because Samara's production is inherently unstable, the skin cell root even more so. One doesn't want large populations anywhere close to a Samara's facility. If anything goes wrong, the resultant explosion can kill hundreds of thousands. Even in the usual, less risky churning process, we do not build Samara's production centers close to cities. Can you imagine what would happen if the riskier skin cell process was being conducted close to a city with a large number of humans ritually bathing above a Samara's production center? Shiva's face suddenly turned white. Public baths in Meluhan cities, he whispered. Exactly, said Brahaspati. Build the facility within a city, below a public bath. One would have all the dead skin cells that one would need. And if something goes wrong, if an explosion takes place, blame the Devyastras or the Nagas. Blame the Chandravanshis if you want, fumed Brahaspati. Having created so many evil specters, you can take your pick. Something is wrong, said Brigu. He was surveying the destroyed remains of Mount Mandar with Dileepa. The Samara's manufacturing facility looked nowhere near completion though reconstruction was on. Dileepa turned towards the sage. I agree, Maharishiji. It has been more than 5 years since the Nagas destroyed Mandar. It's ridiculous that the facility has still not been reconstructed. Brigu turned to Dileepa and waved his hand dismissively. Mount Mandar is not important anymore. It's only a symbol. I'm talking about the attack on Panchavati. Dileepa stared wide-eyed at the sage. Mount Mandar is not important? This means that the rumors are true. Another Samara's manufacturing facility does exist. I had given a whole kit of homing pigeons to the attackers, continued Brigu, not bothering with Dileepa's incredulous look. All of them had been trained to return to this site. The last pigeon came in 2 weeks back. Dileepa frowned. You can trust my man, my lord. He will not fail. Brigu had appointed an officer from Dileepa's army to lead the attack on Shiva's convoy at Panchavati. He did not trust Daksh's ability to detach himself from his love for his daughter. Of that I am sure. He has proven himself trustworthy, strictly complying with my instructions to send back a message every week. The fact that the updates have suddenly stopped means that he has either been captured or killed. I'm sure a message is on its way. We needn't worry. Brigu turned sharply towards Dileepa. Is this how you govern your empire, great king? Is it any wonder that your son's claim to the throne appears legitimate? Dileepa's silence was telling. Brigu sighed. When you prepare for war, you should always hope for the best, but be ready for the worst. The last dispatch clearly stated that they were but 6 days' sail from Panchavati. Having received no word, I am compelled to assume the worst. The attack must have failed. Also, I should assume Shiva knows the identity of the attackers. Dileepa didn't speak, but kept staring at Brigu. He thought Brigu was overreacting. I'm not overreacting, Your Highness, said Brigu. Dileepa was stunned. He hadn't uttered a word. Do not underestimate the issue, said Brigu. This is not about you or me. This is about the future of India. This is about protecting the greatest good. We cannot afford to fail. It is our duty to Lord Brahma, our duty to this great land of ours. Dileepa remained silent, though one thought kept reverberating in his mind. I am way out of my depth here. I have entangled myself with powers that are beyond mere emperors. Chapter 4. A Frog Homily. The aroma of freshly cooked food emerged from Shiva's chambers as his family assembled for their evening meal. Sati's culinary skill and effort were evident in the feast she had lined up for what was practically their first meal together as a family. Shiva, Ganesh and Kartik waited for her to take a seat before they began the meal. In keeping with custom, the family of the Mahadev took some water from their glasses and sprinkled it around their plates, symbolically thanking Goddess Annapurna for her blessings in the form of food and nourishment. After this, they offered the first morsel of food to the gods. Breaking with age-old tradition though, Shiva always offered his first morsel to his wife. For him, she was divine. Sati reciprocated by offering her first morsel to Shiva. And thus the meal began. "Ganesh has got some mangoes for you today," said Sati, looking indulgently at Kartik. Kartik grinned. "Yummy. Thanks Dada." Ganesh smiled and patted Kartik on his back. "You should smile a little more, Kartik," said Shiva. "Life is not so grim." Kartik smiled at his father. "I'll try, Baba." Looking at his other progeny, Shiva inhaled sharply. "Ganesh?" "Yes, Baba," said Ganesh, unsure of the response to his calling Shiva father. "My son," whispered Shiva. "I misjudged you." Ganesh's eyes moistened. "Forgive me," said Shiva. "No, Baba," exclaimed Ganesh, embarrassed. "How can you ask me for forgiveness? You are my father." Brahaspati had told Shiva that he had made Ganesh take an oath of secrecy. Nobody was to know that the former Meluhan chief scientist was alive. Brahaspati did not trust anyone and wanted his experiments on the Mesopotamian bacteria to remain secret. Ganesh had kept his word even at the cost of almost losing his beloved mother and of grievously damaging his relationship with Shiva. "You are a man of your word," said Shiva. "You honored your promise to Brahaspati without sparing a thought for the price you would be paying." Ganesh remained quiet. "I'm proud of you, my son," said Shiva. Ganesh smiled. Sati looked at Shiva, Kartik and then at Ganesh. Her world had come full circle. Life was as perfect as it could possibly be. She did not need anything else. She could live her life in Panchavati till the end of her days. But she knew that this was not to be. A war was coming, a battle that would require major sacrifices. She knew she had to savor these moments for as long as they lasted. "What now, Baba?" asked Kartik seriously. "We are going to eat," laughed Shiva. "And then, hopefully, we will go to sleep." "No, no," smiled Kartik. "You know what I mean. Are we going to proclaim the Samras as the ultimate evil? Are we going to declare war against all of those who continue to use or protect the Samras?" Shiva looked at Kartik thoughtfully. "There has already been a lot of fighting, Kartik. We will not rush into anything." Shiva turned to Ganesh. "I'm sorry, my son, but I need to know more. I have to know more." "I understand, Baba. There are only two groups of people who know all there is to know about this. The Vasudevs and the Vayuputras?" "Yes. I'm not sure if the Vayuputra Council will help me. But I know the Vasudevs will. I'll take you to Ujjain, Baba. You can speak to their chief directly." "Where is Ujjain?" "It's up north, beyond the Narmada." Shiva considered it for a bit. "That would be along the shorter route to Swadweep and Meluha, right?" With the security of Panchavati uppermost in her mind, Kali had led Shiva and his entourage from Kashi to Panchavati via an elaborate route which took a year to traverse. The party had first headed east through Swadweep, then south from Branga. They then moved west from Kalinga through the dangerous Tandak forests before they reached the headwaters of the Godavari where Panchavati lay. Shiva realized that there must be a shorter northern route to Meluha and Swadweep, which was impossible to traverse without a Naga guide, because of the impregnable forests that impeded the path. "Yes, Baba. Though Mausi is very secretive about this route, I know that she would be happy to share it with the three of you. I understand, said Sati. The Nagas have many powerful enemies. Yes, said Ganesh, before turning to Shiva. But that is not the only reason. Let's be honest. Though the war has not yet begun, we already know that the most powerful emperors in the land are against us. Which side everyone takes, including those waiting in the Panchavati guesthouse colony, will become clear over the next few months. Panchavati is a safe haven. It's not wise to give away its secrets just as yet. Shiva nodded. Let me figure out what I should do with my convoy. There aren't too many kings in the Sapt sign who I can readily trust at this point of time. Once I've made up my mind, we can make plans to leave for Ujjain. Kartik turns to Ganesh. Dada, there's one thing I simply don't understand. The Vayuputras are the tribe left behind by Lord Rudra. They help the great seventh Vishnu, Lord Ram, complete his mission. So how is it that these good people do not see the evil that the Samras has become today? Ganesh smiled. I have a theory. Shiva and Sati looked up at Ganesh, while continuing to eat. You've seen a frog, right? Asked Ganesh. Yes, said Kartik. Interesting creatures, especially their tongues. Ganesh smiled. Apparently, an unknown Brahmin scientist had conducted some experiments on frogs a long time ago. He dropped a frog in a pot of boiling water. The frog immediately jumped out. He then placed a frog in a pot full of cold water. The frog settled down comfortably. The Brahmin then began raising the temperature of the water. Gradually, over many hours, the frog kept adapting to the increasingly warm and then hot water till it finally died, without making any attempt to escape. Shiva, Sati and Kartik listened in rapt attention. Naga students learn this story as a life lesson, said Ganesh. Often, our immediate reaction to a sudden crisis helps us save ourselves. Our response to gradual crises that creep up upon us, on the other hand, may be so adaptive as to ultimately lead to self-destruction. Are you suggesting that the Vayuputras keep adapting to the incremental ill effects of the Samras? Asked Kartik. That the bad news is not emerging rapidly enough? Perhaps, said Ganesh. For I refuse to believe that the Vayuputras, the people of Lord Rudra, would consciously choose to let evil live. The only explanation is that they genuinely believe the Samras is not evil. Interesting, said Shiva. And, perhaps you're right too. Sati chipped in with a smile, almost as if to lighten the atmosphere. But do you really believe the frog experiment? Ganesh smiled. It is such a popular story around here that I'd actually tried it, when I was a child. Did you really boil a frog slowly to death? And it sat still all the while? Ganesh laughed. Maa. Frogs don't sit still no matter what you do. Boiling water, cold water or lukewarm water, a frog always leaps out. The family of the Mahadev laughed heartily. Shiva and Sati were exiting the Panchavati Rajya Sabha, having just met with the Naga nobility. Many of the nobles were in agreement with Queen Kali, who wanted to attack Meluha right away and destroy the evil Samras. But some, like Vasuki and Nistik, wanted to avoid war. Vasuki and Nistik genuinely want peace. But for the wrong reasons, said Shiva, shaking his head. They may be Naga nobility, but they believe that their own people deserve their cruel fate, because they are being punished for their past life sins. This is nonsense. Sati, who believed in the concept of karma extending over many births, could not hold back her objection. Just because we don't understand something doesn't necessarily mean it is rubbish, Shiva. Come on, Sati. There is only this life, this moment. That is the only thing we can be sure of. Everything else is only theory. Then why were the Nagas born deformed? Why did I live as a Vikarma for so long? Surely it must be because in some sense we deserved it. We were paying for our past life sins. That's ridiculous. How can anyone be sure about past life sins? The Vikarma system, like every system that governs human lives, was created by us. You fought the Vikarma system and freed yourself. But I didn't free myself, Shiva. You did. It was your strength. And all the Vikarmas, including me, were set free because that was your karma. So how does this work? Asked Shiva disbelievingly. That the compounded totality of sins committed by all the Vikarma over their individual previous lives was nullified at the stroke of a quill when I struck down this law? On that fateful day, in a flash, several lifetimes of sin sullying every Vikarma soul were washed away. A day of divine pardon, indeed. Shiva, are you mocking me? Would I ever do that, dear? Asked Shiva, but his smile gave him away. Don't you see how illogical this entire concept is? How can one believe that an innocent child is born with sin? It's clear as daylight, a newborn child has done no wrong. He has done no right either. He has just been born. He could not have done anything. Perhaps not in this life, Shiva. But it's possible that the child committed a sin in a previous life. Perhaps the child's ancestors committed sins for which the child must be held accountable. Shiva was unconvinced. Don't you get it? It's a system designed to control people. It makes those who suffer or are oppressed blame themselves for their misery. Because you believe you are paying for sins committed either in your own previous lives or those committed by your ancestors, or even community. Perhaps even the sins of the first man ever born. The system therefore propagates suffering as a form of atonement and, at the same time, does not allow one to question the wrongs done unto oneself. Then why do some people suffer? Why do some get far less than what they deserve? The same reason why there are others who get far more than what they deserve. It's completely random. Shiva gallantly reached out to help Sati mount her steed, but she declined and gracefully slid onto the stallion. Her husband smiled. There was nothing he loved more than her intense sense of self-sufficiency and pride. Shiva leapt onto his own horse and with a quick spur matched Sati's pace. Really, Shiva, said Sati, looking towards him. Do you believe that the Paramatma plays dice with the universe? That we are all handed our fate randomly? The Nagas on the road recognized Shiva and bowed low in respect. They didn't believe in the legend of the Nilkanth, but clearly, their queen respected the Mahadev. And that made most Nagas believe in Shiva as well. He politely acknowledged every person, even as he replied to Sati without turning. I think the Paramatma does not interfere in our lives. He sets the rules by which the universe exists. Then, he does something very difficult. What? He leaves us alone. He lets things play out naturally. He lets his creations make decisions about their own lives. It's not easy being a witness when one has the power to rule. It takes a supreme God to be able to do that. He knows this is our world, our Karma Bhumi, said Shiva, waving his hand all around as though pointing out the land of their karma. Don't you think this is difficult to accept? If people believe that their fate is completely random, it would leave them without any sense of understanding, purpose or motivation, or why they are where they are. On the contrary, this is an empowering thought. When you know that your fate is completely random, you have the freedom to commit yourself to any theory that will empower you. If you have been blessed with good fate, you can choose to believe it is God's kindness and ingrained humility within. But if you have been cursed with bad fate, you need to know that no great power is seeking to punish you. Your situation is, in fact, a result of completely random circumstances, an indiscriminate turn of the universe. Therefore, If you decide to challenge your destiny, your opponent would not be some judgmental Lord Almighty who is seeking to punish you. Your opponent would only be the limitations of your own mind. This will empower you to fight your fate. Sati shook her head. Sometimes you are too revolutionary. Shiva's eyes crinkled. Maybe that is itself a result of my past life sins. Laughing together, they cantered out of the city gates. Seeing the Panchavati guest colony in the distance, Shiva whispered gravely, "But one man will have to account to his friends for his karma in this life." Brahaspatiji? Shiva nodded. What do you have in mind? I had asked Brahaspati if he'd like to meet Parvachur and Urvati, to explain to them as to how he is still alive. And he readily agreed. I would have expected nothing less from him. Are you all right? Asked Anandmi. Parvachur and Anandmi were in their private room in the Panchavati guest house colony. I'm thoroughly confused, said Parvachur. The ruler of Meluha should represent the best there is in our way of life, truth, duty and honor. What does it say about us if our emperor is such a habitual lawbreaker? He broke the law when Sati's child was born. I know what Emperor Daksha did was patently wrong. But one could argue that he is just a father trying to protect his child, albeit in his own stupid manner. The fact that he did what was wrong is enough, Anandmi. He broke the law. And now, he has broken one of Lord Rudra's laws by using the Devyastras. How can Meluha, the finest land in the world, have an emperor like him? Isn't something wrong somewhere? Anandmi held her husband's hand. Your emperor was never any good. I could have told you that many years ago. But you don't need to blame all of Meluha for his misdeeds. That's not the way it works. A leader is not just a person who gives orders. He is also the one who symbolizes the society he leads. If the leader is corrupt, then the society must be corrupt too. Who feeds this nonsense to you, my love? A leader is just a human being, like anyone else. He doesn't symbolize anything. Parvachur shook his head. There are some truths that cannot be challenged. A leader's karma impacts his entire land. He is supposed to be his people's icon. That is a universal truth. Anandmi bent towards him with a soft twinkle in her eyes. Parvachur, there is your truth and there is my truth. As for the universal truth, it does not exist. Parvachur smiled as he brushed a stray strand of hair away from her face. You Chandravanshis are very good with words. Words can only be as good or as bad as the thoughts they convey. Parvachur's smile spread wider. So what is your thought on what I should do? My emperor's actions have put me in a situation where my god, the Nilkanth, may declare war on my country. What do I do then? How do I know which side to pick? You should stick to your god, said Anandmi, without any hint of hesitation in her voice. But this is a hypothetical question. So don't worry too much about it. My lord, you called, said Urvati. She had been as surprised as Parvachur when the both of them had been summoned to Shiva's chambers. Since their arrival in Panchavati, Shiva had spent most of his time with the Nagas. Urvati was convinced that the Nagas were somehow complicit in the attack on Shiva's convoy. She also believed the Nilkanth was perhaps investigating the roots of Naga treachery in Panchavati. Parvachur, Urvati, welcome, said Shiva. I called you here because it is time now for you to know the secret of the Nagas. Parvachur looked up, surprised. But why only the two of us, my lord? Because the both of you are Meluhans. I have reason to suspect that the attack on us at the Godavari is linked to many things, the plague in Branga, the plight of the Nagas, and the drying up of the Saraswati. Parvachur and Urvati were flummoxed. But I am certain about one thing, said Shiva. The attack is connected to the Destruction of Mountain Mandar. What? How? Only one man can explain it. One whom you believe is dead. Yervati and Parvateshwar spun around as they heard the door open. Brahaspati walked in quietly. The Samras is evil? Asked Anandami incredulously. Is that what the Lord Nilkanth thinks? Parvateshwar and Anandami were in their chambers at the Panchavati guest colony. Bhagarat had just joined them. I'm not sure about what he thinks, said Parvateshwar. But Brahaspati seems to think so. But evil is supposed to be evil for everybody, said Bhagarat. Why should a Suryavanshi turncoat decide what evil is? Why should we listen to him? Why should the Nilkanth listen to him? Bhagarat, do you expect me to defend Brahaspati, the man who destroyed the soul of our empire? Asked Parvateshwar. Just a minute, said Anandami, raising her hand. Think this through. If the plague in Branga is linked to the Samras, if the slow depletion of the river Saraswati is linked to the Samras, if the birth of the Nagas is linked to the Samras, then isn't it fair to think that maybe it is evil? So what is the Nilkanth planning to do? Does he want to ban the Samras? Asked Bhagarat. I don't know, Bhagarat, snapped an irritated Parvateshwar, his world having turned upside down because of Daksha and now Brahaspati. You keep asking me questions, the answers to which I do not know. Anandami placed her hand on Parvateshwar's shoulders. Perhaps the Nilkanth is just as shocked as we are. He needs to think things over. He cannot afford to make hasty decisions. Well, he has made one already, said Parvateshwar. Bhagarat and Anandami looked at Parvateshwar curiously. We are to leave for Swadweep once all have recovered from their injuries. The Lord has asked us to wait for him at Kashi till he decides his next move. He believes King Athithagva has not sold out to Ayodhya in the conspiracy to assassinate us on the Godavari. But if we go to Kashi, my father will get to know that we are alive, said Bhagarat. He will know his attack has failed. We have to keep quiet about it. We have to pretend that nothing happened, that we were not attacked at all, that we made an uneventful journey to Panchavati and back. Won't they wonder about their ships? The Lord says that's all right. Many things can happen during long sea and river voyages. They may believe their ships met with an accident before they could attack us. Bhagarat raised his eyebrows. My father may be stupid enough to believe that story. But he is not the leader. Whoever put together a conspiracy of this scale will certainly investigate what went wrong. But investigations take time, allowing the Nilkanth to check whatever else it is that he needs to. The Lord is not coming with us? Asked a surprised Anandami. Parvateshwar shook his head. No. And the Lord has said we should let it be known that neither his family nor he is with us at Kashi. It should be publicized that he remains in Panchavati. The Lord believes that it will keep us safe as the attack was aimed at him. That can mean only one thing, said Bhagarat. He chooses to take Brahaspati at face value but wants to ascertain a few more things before he makes up his mind. Anandami looked at her husband with concern in her eyes. She knew that a war was approaching, perhaps the biggest war that India had ever seen. And in all probability, Meluha and Shiva would be on opposite sides. Which side would her husband choose? Whatever happens, said Anandami, holding Parvateshwar's face, we must have faith in the Nilkanth. Parvateshwar nodded silently. Shiva, Parshuram and Nandi were sitting on the banks of the Godavari. Shiva took a deep drag from the chilam as he looked towards the river, lost in thought. He let out as he turned to his friends. Are you sure, Parshuram? Yes, my lord, replied Parshuram. I can even take you to the uppermost point of the mighty Brahmaputra, where she is that Sangpo. But I wouldn't recommend it, for Fatalities can be high on that treacherous route. Shiva's silence provoked Parshuram to probe further. What is it about that river, my lord? He had been intrigued by the abnormal interest shown by the Nagas in the Brahmaputra's course as well. First the Nagas, now you. Why is everyone so interested in it? It may be the carrier of evil, Parshuram. Nandi looked up in surprise. Doesn't that Sangpo begin close to your own home in Tibet, my lord? Yes, Nandi, said Shiva. It seems evil has been closer than it initially appeared. Nandi remained quiet. He was one of the few who knew the ships that attacked Shiva's convoy were from Meluha. He knew what he had to do. If it came to a choice between Shiva and his country, he would choose Shiva. But it still hurt him immensely. He knew he might have to be a part of an army that would attack his beloved motherland. Meluha. He hated his fate for having put him in such a situation. I think I know how to find the mastermind, my lord, said Bhagat. He had sought an appointment with Shiva as soon as he had stepped out of Parvateshwar's chambers. He knew that his father had decided to oppose the Nilkanth. It made sense therefore for Bhagat to immediately prove his loyalty to Shiva. He didn't expect Shiva to lose. Regardless of the opinion of the kings, the people would be with the Nilkanth. How? Asked Shiva. You'd agree that my father hardly has the wherewithal to draw up such an elaborate plan. I'd say his selfish needs have made him succumb to the evil designs of another. Shiva edged forward, intrigued. You think he has been bribed? Your father is in no need of money. What can be a better bribe than life itself, my lord? Had you seen my father a few years back, you would have thought he was but a small step away from the cremation pyre. A life of debauchery and drink had wreaked havoc within his body. But today, he looks younger than I have ever known. The Samras? I don't think so. I know he had tried the Samras in the past. It hadn't worked. Somebody is supplying him with superior medicines. Something that is otherwise unavailable to even a king. Shiva's eyes widened. Who could be more powerful, more knowledgeable than a king? Do you think a Maharishi is helping him? Bhagat shook his head. No, my lord. I think a Maharishi is leading him. But who can that Maharishi be? I don't know. But when I go back to Ayodhya. Ayodhya. If we are to maintain that no ships attacked us on the Godavari, my lord, then what reason can there be for my not going back to Ayodhya? It will arouse suspicion. More importantly, I can only uncover the true identity of the master when I'm in Ayodhya. Despite my father's best efforts, I still have eyes and ears in the impregnable city. Shiva considered this for a moment. He agreed with the train of thought. Moreover, now that Dileepa had chosen to align himself against Shiva, Bhagat would be even more eager to prove his loyalty to him. Shiva nodded. All right, go to Ayodhya. But my lord, when the time comes, I hope Ayodhya and Swadweep will be shown some kindness. Kindness? We have not used the Samras excessively, my lord. Only a few Chandravanshi nobles use it, and that too, sparingly. It is the Meluhans who have abused its usage. That is what has made evil rise. Therefore it is only fair that when the Samras is banned, this ban be imposed only on Meluha. Swadweep has not benefited from the drink of the gods. I hope we will be allowed to use it. You didn't choose to use less Samras, Bhagat, said Shiva. You just didn't have the opportunity to do so. If you had, the situation would have been very different. You know that just as much as I do. But Meluha. Yes, Meluha has used more. So naturally, they will suffer more. But let me make one thing clear. If I decide the Samras is evil, then no one will use it. No one. Bhagat kept silent. Is that clear? Asked Shiva. Of course, my lord. Chapter 5. The Shorter Route. A caravan of 500 people was moving up the northern path from Panchavati towards the Vasudev city of Ujjain. Shiva and his family were in the center, surrounded by half a brigade of joint Naga and Branga soldiers in standard defensive formations. Kali did not want to reveal this route to anyone from Shiva's original convoy, so none of them were included. Nandi and Parshuram were the only exceptions. Brahaspati had been included, for Shiva might need his advice in understanding what the Vasudevs had to say about the Samras. Whereas Shiva persisted in his quest and questions with Brahaspati, the old brotherly love that they had shared was missing. Parvateshwar, Yarvati, an enemy, and Bhagat, along with the original convoy, had stayed back at Panchavati. They were to leave for Kashi in a few weeks, their eastern route going through the Dandak forest, onward through Branga. Vishwadama was to accompany them as a guide up to Branga. Ganesh, does Ujjain fall on the way from Panchavati to Meluha, or do we take a detour? Asked Shiva, goading his horse forward over the path built through the forest. It was fenced by two protective hedges. The inner layer comprised the harmless Nagavali creepers, while the outer one had poisonous vines to prevent wild animals from entering. Actually, Bubba, Ujjain is on the way to Swadweep. It's to the northeast. Meluha lies to the northwest. Sati tried to get her bearings of Meluha and Mka at the dried mouth of the Saraswati. The Meluhan city of births was not too far from the mouth of the Narmada. Does the Narmada serve as your waterway? One can sail west for Meluha and east for Ujjain and Swadweep. Yes, Ma, answered Ganesh. Shiva turned to his son. Have you ever been to Mka? How do abandoned Naga children get adopted? Mka is the one place where there is no bias against the Nagas, Bubba. Perhaps the sight of helpless Naga babies, shrieking in pain as a cancerous growth bursts through their bodies, melts the hearts of the authorities. The Mka governor takes personal interest in attempting to save as many Naga babies as he can in the crucial first month after their birth. A Naga ship sails down the Narmada every month, docks at Nkulate at night, and the babies born in that month are handed over to us by the Mka Rekha keeper. Some non-Naga parents choose to stay back and move to Panchavati for the sake of their children. Don't the Mka authorities stop them? Actually, the tenets of Meluhan law require parents to accompany their Naga children to Panchavati. In doing so, they are following their law. But others refuse to do so. They abandon their children and return to their comfortable life in Meluha. In such cases, only the child is handed over. The Mka governor pretends not to notice this breach of law. Sati shook her head. She had lived in Meluha for more than 100 years, a few of which were in Mka as an infant. She had never known any of this. It was almost like she was discovering her seemingly upright nation anew. Her father had not been the only one to break the law. It appeared as if many Meluhans valued the comforts of their land more than their duty towards their children or towards observing Lord Ram's laws. Shiva looked ahead to see a large ship anchored in a massive lagoon. The waters were blocked on the far side by a dense grove. Having seen the grove of floating Sundari trees in Branga, Shiva assumed these trees must also have free-floating roots. Third ahead seemed obvious. I guess we have reached your secret lagoon. I assume the Narmada is beyond that grove. There is a massive river beyond that grove, Bubba, said Ganesh. But it is not the Narmada. It is the Tapi. We have to cross to the other side. After that it is a few more days' journey to the Narmada. Shiva smiled. The Lord Almighty has blessed this land with too many rivers. India can never run short of water. Not if we abuse our rivers the way we are now abusing the Saraswati. Shiva nodded, silently agreeing with Ganesh. Brigu tore open the letter. It was exactly what he had expected. The Vayuputras had excommunicated him. Lord Brigu, it has been brought to our attention that Devyastras were loaded onto a fleet of ships in Kurikapa. Investigations have led to the regrettable conclusion that you manufactured them, using materials that were given to you strictly for research. While we understand that you would never misuse the weapons expressly banned by our God, Lord Ayudhra, we cannot allow the unauthorized transport of these weapons to go unpunished. You are therefore prohibited from ever entering Pariah or interacting with a Vayaputra again. We do hope you will honor the greater promise that every friend of a Vayaputra makes to Lord Ayudhra, that of never using the Devyastras. It is the expectation of the council that you will surrender the weapons at once to Vayaputra. Security. What surprised Brigu was that the note had been signed by the Mithra, leader of the council. It was rare for the Mithra to sign orders personally. Usually, it was done by one of the Amartyshpand, the 6 deputies on the council. The Vayuputras were clearly taking this very seriously. But Brigu believed that he had not broken the law. He had already written to the Vayuputras that they were making the institution of the Nilkantha mockery by not acting against this self-appointed impostor. But alas, the Vayuputras had done nothing. However, he could see how they would think he had misused their research material. Ironically, he had not. Even if he had got over his qualms about using that material. Brigu knew there was simply not enough to make the quantity of Devyastras that were needed. He had made his own stockpile of such weapons, using materials he himself had compiled over the years. Perhaps that was the reason why they did not have the destructive potency of the Vayaputra material. They had entire laboratories, whereas Brigu worked alone. Brigu sighed. He had used all the weapons that he had manufactured. The only mystery was whether they had achieved their purpose, whether the Nilkantha had been assassinated. Talking to Dakshal was an exercise in futility. He seemed to be in a state of shock since the rupture of his relations with his daughter. Brigu had sent off another ship, manned by men drawn from Dilipa's army, to the mouth of the Godavari to investigate the matter. But it would be months before he knew what had happened. "Anything else, my lord?" asked the attendant. Brigu dismissed her with an absent-minded wave. Perhaps the job was done. Maybe the Nilkanth was no more. But it was also possible that Brigu's ships had failed. Even worse, the Nilkanth may have been persuaded by the Nagas and was plotting to turn the people against the Samras. Nothing was certain till he received news of the 5 ships he had sent earlier to attack Shiva's convoy. For now, much as he disliked living in Devagiri, he had no choice but to wait. He had to stay till he knew the Samras was safe. He believed India's future was at stake. Brigu took a deep breath and went back into a meditative trance. Shiva's convoy had covered ground quickly after crossing the Tampi and was waiting at the edge of another secret lagoon, while the Nagas prepared to set sail. Beyond the floating grove guarding this lagoon, flowed the mighty Narmada, mandated by Lord Manu as the southern border of the Sapt Sindhu, the land of the 7 rivers. How much farther, Dada? Not too far, Kartik. Just a few more weeks, answered Ganesh. We will sail east up the Narmada for a few days, then march on foot through the passes of the Great Vindhya Mountains till we reach the Chambal River. We would then have to sail for only a few days down the Chambal to reach Ujjain. Sati watched the sailors pull the gangway plank towards the rudimentary dock, preparing the ship for loading. Kritika nudged her horse so it would trot up to Sati's. I wish Queen Kali had accompanied us, my lady. Sati turned to Kritika. I know. But she is a queen. She has many responsibilities in Panchavati. Further conversation was interrupted by the ship's gangway plank landing on the dock. With a loud thud, Parvateshwar, Anandmi, Bhagat and Yurvati were dining together in the late afternoon. They had just entered the first of 5 clearings on the Dandakaranya road. From Panchavati, the road led to the hidden lagoon on the Madhumati in Branga. Accompanied by the convoy of 1,600 soldiers that had set out with Shiva more than a year ago, they were marching back to Kashi to await Shiva's return. Bhagat looked at the 5 paths in wonder. Only one of these was correct while the others were decoys that would lead trespassers to their doom. These Nagas are obsessive about security. Anandmi looked up. Can we blame them? Do not forget that it was this attitude that saved our lives when those ships attacked us on the Godavari. True, said Bhagat. The Nagas will no doubt prove to be good allies. Their loyalty to the Nilkanth isn't suspect, though the reasons might well be. When the moment of truth is upon us, all will have to answer a simple question: will they fight the world for the Nilkanth? I know I will. Anandmi's eyes flashed as she looked at Parvateshwar and then back at Bhagat, chiding him. Get back to your food, little brother. Parvateshwar looked at Anandmi with a tortured expression. I don't think the Paramatma will be so unkind to me. He could not have made me wait for more than a century to find my living God, only to force me to choose between my country and him. I'm sure the Almighty will find a way to ensure that Meluha and the Lord Nilkanth are not on opposite sides. Parvateshwar's sad smile told Anandmi he himself did not believe that. She touched her husband's shoulder gently. Bhagat played with his roti absent-mindedly. He was beginning to believe they could not count on Parvateshwar. That would be a huge loss for the Nilkanth's army. Parvateshwar's strategic abilities had the capacity to turn the tide in any war. Yurvati looked at Parvateshwar with sympathy. She could identify with his inner conflict. In her case though, a decision had emerged that sat comfortably in her heart. Her emperor had committed heinous acts which dishonored Meluha. This was no longer the country she had loved and admired all her life. She knew in her heart that Lord Ram would not have condoned the immorality that Meluha had descended into. Under Daksha's watch, her path was clear. In a fight between Meluha and Shiva, she would choose the Nilkanth, for he would set things right and Meluha as well. The Naga ship was anchored close to the Chambal shore. Shiva, Sati, Ganesh and Kartik climbed down rope ladders to the large boat that had been tied to the ship's anchor line. Brahaspati, Nandi and Parshuram followed them, accompanied by 10 Naga soldiers. When everyone had disembarked, they began to row ashore. The Vasudevas being even more secretive than the Nagas, Shiva did not expect to find any sign of habitation close to the river. Almost touching the river bank, a wall of dense foliage blocked the view beyond. Weeds had spread over the gentle Chambal waters, making rowing a back-breaking task. Ganesha navigated the boat towards a slender clearing between 2 immense palm trees. Shiva could sense something unnatural about the clearing, but couldn't put his finger on it. He turned towards Kartik, who was staring at the clearing as well. Bubba, look at the trees behind the clearing, said Kartik. You'll have to bend down to my level. As Shiva bent low, the image became clear. The trees behind the clearing were organized unnaturally, given the dense, uncontrolled growth surrounding it. Placed equidistant, they seemed to grow in height as one looked farther away. This was because the ground itself sloped upwards in a gentle gradient. It was obviously not a natural hillock. A majority of the trees behind the clearing were the Gulmohar, their flaming orange flowers suggestive of fire. Shiva blinked at what appeared to be an optical illusion. He suddenly stood up, rocking the boat as Sati and Ganesh reached out to hold him steady. The Gulmohar trees had been placed in a specific pattern that was visible from a certain distance as one placed oneself directly in front of the small clearing between the twin palms. It was in the shape of a flame, a specific symbol that Shiva recognized. Fravashi, whispered Shiva. Surprised, Ganesh asked, how do you know that term, Bubba? Shiva looked at Ganesh and then back at the Gulmohar trees. The pattern had disappeared. Shiva sat down and turned towards Ganesh. How do you know that term? It's a VAYUPUTRA term. It represents the feminine spirit of Lord Rudra, which has the power to assist us in doing what is right. We are free to either accept it or reject it. But the spirit never refuses to help. Never. Shiva smiled as he began to understand his ancient memories. Who told you about Fravashi, Bubba? Asked Ganesh again. My uncle Manabu, said Shiva. It was among the many concepts and symbols that he made me learn. He said it would help me when the time came. Who was he? I thought I knew, said Shiva. But I'm beginning to wonder if I knew him well enough. The conversation came to a halt as the boat hit the banks. Two Naga soldiers jumped out and pulled the boat farther up, onto dry land. Tugging hard on the line, they tied the craft to a conveniently placed tree stump. The landing party quickly disembarked. Kartik surveyed the palms that marked the clearing. He turned towards Ganesh, who was standing at the center of the clearing. Can everyone stand behind me, please, requested Ganesh. I do not want anybody between me and the palm trees. The others moved away as Ganesh closed his eyes to drown out the distractions surrounding him and find his concentration. Ganesh breathed deeply and clapped hard repeatedly in an irregular beat. The claps were set in the Vasudev code and were being transmitted to the gatekeeper of Ujjain. This is Ganesh, the Naga lord of the people, requesting permission to enter your great city with our entourage. Shiva heard the soft sounds of claps reverberating back. Ujjain's gatekeeper had answered. Welcome, Lord Ganesh. This is an unexpected honor. Are you on your way to Swadweep? No. We have come to meet with Lord Gopal, the great chief Vasudev. Was there something specific you needed to discuss, Lord Ganesh? Clearly, the Vasudevs were still not comfortable with the Nagas, despite the fact that they had reached out to Ganesh for the Naga medicines to help with the birth of Kartik. The Ujjain gatekeeper was trying to parry off Ganesh's request while trying not to insult him. Ganesh continued to clap rhythmically. It is not I who seeks Lord Gopal, honored gatekeeper. It is the Lord Neelkanth. Silence for a few moments. Then the sound of claps in quick succession. Is the Lord Neelkanth at the palm clearing with you? He is standing with me. He can hear you. Silence once again, before the gatekeeper responded. Lord Ganesh, Lord Gopal himself is coming to the clearing. We will be honored to host your convoy. It will take us a day to get there, please bear with us till then. Thank you. Ganesh rubbed his palms together and looked at Shiva. It will take a day for them to get here, Bubba. We can wait in our ship till they arrive. Have you ever been to Ujjain? Asked Shiva. No. I have met the Vasudevs just once at this very clearing. Alright, let's get back to our ship. Are you telling me Lord Brigu visited Ayodhya 8 times in the last year? Asked a surprised Surapadman. The Crown Prince of Magad maintained his own espionage network, independent of the notoriously inefficient Royal Magad Spy Service. His man had just informed him of the goings-on in the Ayodhya royal household. Yes, Your Highness, answered the spy. Furthermore, Emperor Dilipa himself has visited Meluha twice in the same period. That, I am aware of, said Surapadman. But the news you bring throws new light on it. Perhaps Dilipa was not going to meet that fool Daksha after all. Maybe he was going to Meet Lord Brigu. But why would the great sage be interested in Dilipa? That I do not know, your highness. But I'm sure you have heard of Emperor Dilipa's newly acquired youthful appearance. Perhaps Lord Brigu has been giving him the Samras? Surapadman waved his hand dismissively. The Samras is easily available too. Swadweepan royalty. Dilipa doesn't need to plead with a Maharishi for it. I know Dilipa has been using the Samras for years. But when one has abused the body as much as he has, even the Samras would find it difficult to delay his aging. I suspect Lord Brigu is giving him medicines that are even more potent than the Samras. But why would Lord Brigu do that? That's the mystery. Try to find out. Any news of the Neelkanth? No, your highness. He remains in Naga territory. Surapadman rubbed his chin and looked out of the window of his palace chambers. Along the Gunga, his gaze seemed to stretch beyond the river into the jungle that extended to the south, the forests where his brother Ugrasen had been killed by the Nagas. He cursed Ugrasen silently. He knew the truth of his brother's murder. Addicted to bull racing, Ugrasen had indulged in increasingly reckless bets. Desperate to get good child riders for his bulls, he used to scour tribal forests, kidnapping children at will. On one such expedition he had been killed by a Naga, who was trying to protect a hapless mother and her young boy. What he could not understand though was why a Naga would risk his life to save a forest woman and her child. But the death had narrowed Surapadman's choices. The Neelkanth would lead his followers against whoever he decided was evil. A war was inevitable. There would be those who would oppose him. Surapadman did not care much about this war against evil. All he wanted was to ensure that Magad would fight on the side opposed to Ayodhya. He intended to use wartime chaos to establish Magad as the overlord of Swadweep and himself as emperor. But Ugrasen's killing had deepened his father King Mahendra's distrust of the Nagas into unadulterated hatred. Surapadman knew Mahendra would force him to fight against whichever side the Nagas allied with. His only hope lay in the Nagas and the Emperor of Ayodhya choosing the same side. Kanakala waited patiently in the chambers of Maharishi Brigu at Daksha's palace. The Maharishi was in deep meditation. Though his chamber was in a palace, it was as simple and severe as his real home in a Himalayan cave. Brigu sat on the only piece of furniture in the room, a stone bed. Kanakala therefore had no choice but to stand. Icy water had been sprinkled on the floor and the walls. The resultant cold and clammy dampness made her shiver slightly. She looked at the bowl of fruit at the far corner of the room on a small stand. The Maharishi seemed to have eaten just one fruit over the previous 3 days. Kanakala made a mental note to order fresh fruit to be brought in. An idol of Lord Brahma had been installed in an indentation in the wall. Kanakala stared fixedly at the idol as she repeated the soft chanting of Brigu. Om Brahme Nama. Om Brahme Nama. Brigu opened his eyes and gazed at Kanakala contemplatively before speaking. Yes, my child. My lord, a sealed letter has been delivered for you by bird courier. It has been marked as strictly confidential. Therefore, I thought it fit to bring it to you personally. Brigu nodded politely and took the letter from Kanakala without saying a word. As instructed, we have also kept the pigeon with us. It can return to where it came from. Of course, this would not be possible if the ship has moved. Please let me know if you'd like to send a message back with the pigeon. Will that be all, my lord? Asked Kanakala. Yes. Thank you. As Kanakala shut the door behind her, Brigu broke the seal and opened the letter. Its contents were disappointing. My lord, we have found some wreckage of our ships at the mouth of the Godavari. They have obviously been blown up. It is difficult to judge whether they were destroyed as a result of sabotage or an accident owing to the goods they carried. It is also difficult to say if all the ships were destroyed or if there are any survivors. Await further instructions. The words gave Brigu information without adding to his understanding of the situation. Not one of the 5 ships that he had sent to assassinate the Nilkanth and destroy Panchavati had returned or sent a message. The wreckage of at least some of the ships had been discovered, having drifted down the Godavari. Both the possible conclusions were disturbing. Either the ships had been destroyed or some of them had been captured. Brigu could not afford to send another ship up the Godavari to try and dig deeper. He might end up gifting another well-built warship to the enemy just before the final war. Of course, there was also the possibility that the ships may have succeeded in their mission and had been destroyed subsequently. But Brigu simply could not be sure. Brigu would have to wait. Maybe an angry Nilkanth would emerge from the jungles of Dandak. He could rally his followers and attack those allied against him. If that did not happen, then the sage would assume that the Nilkanth threat had passed. Brigu rang the bell, summoning the guard outside. He would send a message to the ship at the mouth of the Godavari with orders to return. He would also have to order Meluha and Ayodhya to prepare their armies for battle, just in case.